Ken O'Keefe, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I have to say, first off, love and respect to the organizers. I hate organizing. I hope to never do it again. It's a rather thankless job and very stressful and very difficult. And it's a real pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you for coming as well. And I never script anything. I always come straight from the heart, so you can be assured that that's exactly what I'll be saying today. I was especially intrigued by a previous speaker and a lot of the concepts he put forward, because I've lived my life very much in accord with many of the principles that he was talking about. I very much believe that we create our own reality, and in order to create a better reality, which ultimately is my goal. I mean, for me, the only thing that really matters is to affect a better world, a just world, a peaceful world in which every single person can live their life free in dignity, that our children actually inherit a future, whereas right now, there is not a future for our children, and certainly children whose lives are being destroyed all around the world right now. And I firmly believe that the path to affecting this better world is by taking responsibility for our participation or our apathy, acquiescence, complicity in the crimes that are being committed in our name. Some of us, of course, will play a much larger role in that, and that's exactly where I came from as an American-born citizen. I believed that my nation was the greatest in the world, freedom and democracy and all this sort of stuff. And I went through that same indoctrination process that every American goes through, and it was because of that process and the ignorance that stems from that kind of indoctrination that I ultimately joined the Marine Corps in 1989. I was 19 years old. I actually did it because I felt that I was lacking in discipline and initiative, and I felt the Marine Corps would help instill these things in me. And I'm really happy that I went through this experience and that I remember my own ignorance, because it allows me to maintain an equal level with everyone, because I don't in any way think or suggest that I am in any way better or above. And the introduction, as beautiful as it was, I've met too many people who have done too many incredible things to think that I'm in any way more special than any of them. There are people facing down death every single day just by standing up and doing the right thing, and that really can't be overstated. I mean, if you do the right thing in many parts of the world, it is an instant death sentence. We have trained death squads in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and other parts of the world that are trained in the art of torture and assassination, and we have exterminated countless people who have done the right thing. We've tortured their family members. We've done some of the most hideous things. And of course, you know, you being Scottish, I don't think that maybe you play as large a role as we as Americans have played, but at the end of the day, I really depart from people who suggest that because I went on a protest or because I didn't vote for that candidate, that I'm not responsible. I don't buy into that at all. The reality is that the powers that be, those that are abusing their positions of power, who have breached the public trust, who continuously lie and prostitute themselves in a policy which is a never-ending state of tyranny, which prevents human dignity from flourishing and allows for this kind of absolute insanity to continue to the point where we have been and continue to threaten our own existence. This is simply not debatable. We live in a collective state of insanity. For me, that's really what it boils down to, is are we going to become sane? Because it really doesn't matter what perspective you have, whether you're a Muslim or an atheist or a socialist or a capitalist or whatever it is. You can come at it from whatever angle you like. As long as it has at its basis sanity, we will affect a better world. But we must be sane. And in a sane perspective, we have to understand that when we are inactive, we are complicit with the actions that people are taking, especially when we come from Western nations, especially if we come from the United States and Britain in particular. And I decided at a certain point that, you know, for me, the first step, really, one of my first major steps was renouncing U.S. citizenship. And it was really rather simple. I took the time to look at what is citizenship. What is it? Well, it's a contract. It's a contract between you and the state. And in that contract, there are rights, supposedly, but there are also obligations. Now, if you entered into a contract to buy a car, you sign that contract and you intend to honor that contract. Well, each one of us was entered into a contract, whether it's being a subject or a citizen. We were entered into a contract at birth, whether we like it or not. And if we look at the actual content of this contract, it compels us to do things such as pay taxes into a system which is being used to kill people en masse, to kill brothers and sisters who have committed no crime against us and who are really generally victims because they have a resource which we covet. And of course, we're not really benefiting, the citizens and subjects. It's these power-mad psychopaths at the top of the pyramid that are using us like pawns, especially the military, like pawns, disposable pawns in a game, so that they can wrestle more of these resources away from the people and continue a system of tyranny which again takes us headlong into self-destruction. This is the world we live in. Now, if we're not responsible for this, who is? Who is? Is it the power-mad psychopaths at the top of the pyramid? Well, if they're responsible, then we don't have any chance, do we? Because if they're responsible, are they going to change their course out of the goodness of their hearts? No, they're not. They're psychopaths. And those that serve them, the prostitutes that pretend to be our representatives in government, are just that. They're prostitutes who've sold their soul. They covet material things, and they seek to pleasure themselves with all that the material world supposedly offers them. And they lie to us every single time. With rare exception, at any of the higher levels of power, all of these individuals are vetted. With rare exception do they ever do what is proper and right and in the interest of the people. That's not their job. That's not who they serve. They serve the power-mad psychopaths at the top of the pyramid. Now, we can argue as to who that might be. I have my own ideas, but I wouldn't claim to know exactly who is in power. But one of the things that I do know is that the main method of control that they're using to be able to maintain this system is finance. And if there was any one thing that I would say we need to pay attention to, and I'm glad that we're having this financial crisis, I think it's great, fantastic. Let it get worse and worse and worse, because it's amazing how people who had the same reality right there in front of them, staring them in the face, manage to not see it. But when they become more uncomfortable, all of a sudden these things become clearer. And the more uncomfortable it gets, the more clear it becomes. If you ask an Iraqi person during shock and awe how they feel about their liberation, well, it's fairly obvious how somebody who's just lost their child, who's been blown to bits by a bomb produced in our country so that we can liberate them, that it's actually not all about liberation now, is it? But the person back in the comfortable, affluent West can be conned into believing that somehow there's some nobility in what we're doing. And yet we continue to do this over and over. For me, like Syria, haven't we done this before? Talk about deja vu. I mean, didn't we just do this whole game not long ago? And it baffles me how people who seemingly understand the crimes of imperialism buy into the notion that somehow, some way, by us giving support to so-called rebels, that we're going to somehow liberate these people. We are, once again, carrying out a charade, and the only way that this can be continued is by inaction. I firmly believe that we can change it. There are many things that we could do that would make a substantial difference, and the only thing that really is standing between us and that reality of a better world is committing ourselves to it. One of the things that was discussed in the last presentation was death, and I was kind of hoping you could get a little bit more into it. In fact, I bought Anthony's book about the afterlife and whatnot. I'm not a religious person, but I am very much spiritually aware, and I have no doubt that so much of the reason why I can empathize with others and see them as I see myself is because I have experienced through past life experiences, however it may be. I don't know about specifics, but when I see a parent weeping over their dead child, I don't have to try and sympathize. I've been in that position before. I have felt what it's like to have my child ripped away from me like that. And I know that that pain is as intense as any pain can possibly be. And I know what is even worse is that this is happening on a continuous basis, and it is completely and totally unnecessary. It does not have to be this way. It is this way because we, as people of conscience, have not done everything that we're capable of doing. Now, if we were sitting here and a woman was being gang raped right there, what would we do? Would we sit by and simply allow this woman to be raped? Of course not. We would get up and we would stop that crime right there, and we might beat the death out of these people out of death who are doing something like that. But this is exactly what is happening. People are being raped and murdered every single day. And, well, we're not willing to risk our life for that because we suffer from a disease of disconnect. We don't see that other person as ourselves. We don't see them as a brother and a sister. And for me, that is exactly what has guided me, is the understanding that we are, in fact, all connected, that we are all brothers and sisters in one human family. In fact, we're all brothers and sisters in the family of life. And in fact, it's not even on this terrestrial realm. It goes on beyond this universe, this solar system and this galaxy, into the universe and into different dimensions of time and space, everything connected. And a sane individual sees the other as he sees himself and wants for the other as he would for himself. The only requirement is sanity. A psychopath might not be able to comprehend this because they're a psychopath, but somebody who is sane, who is a human being, cannot sit by and allow a woman to be raped or a child to be murdered and simply protest about it. They have to do more. You have to do more than that. And everyone has their own way. I would not suggest that everyone should be trying to model their life after me. That's ridiculous, and everyone has a unique path. And some people are capable of facing greater danger than others, and there's no shame in that. There is no shame in that at all. But if we honestly look at ourselves and ask ourselves, am I doing everything that I can do to help affect a better world? I think most of us will answer that question in the negative. There is more that we can do. Now, let me give you a physical example of where I believe we could do a hell of a lot more than we've done. Back in 2002, in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq, I saw what was coming. I mean, it really didn't take a genius to figure it out. The whole weapons of mass destruction and whatnot. I mean, even if that were true, well, we armed that son of a bitch, and we supported him while he was gassing countless Kurds and Iranians. We continued to supply him with weapons. Even after he committed these atrocious crimes, we gave him economic support, agricultural support, political support. So even if he did have weapons of mass destruction, how in the hell could we justify invading a country and bombing the crap out of it and invariably killing a whole lot of innocent civilians simply because we armed the son of a bitch in the first place? I mean, that's just ridiculous. And ultimately, anybody with half a brain would realize that the real victims in an invasion of Iraq is not going to be Saddam Hussein, even though he hung. It isn't him, it's the people, and they continue to suffer. Again, this is not me being some sort of genius. Anyone could see that. And yet, what did we do? Now, as much as I found some inspiration in the fact that people did get up off their asses and get out in the streets and actually demonstrate against this, I knew there was no question at all that this decision had been made long before the whole weapons of mass destruction ruse, and that there was no way at all that demonstrations were going to stop it. And it made me angry, very angry, because I knew as well as an ex-Marine that I had served in the same military that was getting ready to go in and commit crimes against humanity, war crimes, and so many atrocities. I knew it was happening again, and I felt, as I still do to this day, a certain level of responsibility for that. I served within that entity, regardless of how much I had been indoctrinated. I was still responsible in my own small way for what was happening. And I asked myself, what can I do? What can I do? When I thought about it, I realized, there's one truth in this world. It's a sick and twisted reality which remains to this day, and that is that we Westerners, our lives are valued completely differently from the way dark-skinned people's lives are valued in the so-called third world. When one of us dies, we hear all about how this person had dreams and aspirations, and his brother and his sister, and how much they hurt, and all the pain that they feel, and blah, 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 blah. I'm not diminishing the pain and suffering that people feel when a loved one dies, but why is it that our lives are portrayed in such ways, and yet people are being slaughtered in mass in other parts of the world? Drone strikes in Pakistan going on virtually every day, or certainly on a regular basis. We don't hear the profiles of these people and the lives and the aspirations and all the things that they wanted to do. We don't hear about that. The bottom line is that if one white person dies in a place like that, like Thomas Herndal as an example, or Rachel Corrie, which I love them, beautiful people, but why is it that we know their names? Because they're white and they come from the West predominantly. That's the reason why. This is a sick and twisted reality, but in this sick and twisted reality is power. That is an opportunity for us, those of us who come from the so-called prosperous Western civilization that really doesn't exist. We have a power in that. So when I thought about it and I reflected on it, I thought, you know what? If there's any way to stop the invasion of Iraq, it would be to make the invasion politically untenable. Now, how could we make it politically untenable? What I argued was that if we had a mass migration to Iraq, a mass migration, I always thought that about 10,000 people would probably be enough. I looked at the figures of how many people live in the West. I mean, it's over 1 billion people. So 10,000 out of 1 billion, it's not a huge number. It's not actually as big as it might sound. And what if 10,000 people traveled to Iraq and positioned themselves at sites that are supposed to be protected by the Geneva Conventions? Specifically, water treatment facilities, power plants, food storage sites, places like that which are essential to the civilian population. And as always happens, so predictably in a war, those are the places that get hit. And who suffers most? It's not the military, and certainly not the leaders. It's the people, the everyday people who committed no harm, no foul towards us, especially children, women and children, who suffer the most. What if 10,000 of us went down to Iraq and we positioned ourselves in water treatment facilities, power plants, food storage sites, and other sites which are essential to the civilian population? I want you to think to yourself, if we had done that, if we had managed to do that, which, believe me, there was a chance that it could have happened. And I could get into the whole story of it, but long story short, infiltration, destruction from within. Very powerful method. I've experienced it more than once. Something beautiful, which I will say, in all honesty, it was a beautiful idea. And I'm happy that I put it forward, but it was a great, great, great tragedy that it was corrupted from the inside and did not reach its potential. Because I'll tell you what, if 10,000 of us had managed to get down to Iraq and positioned ourselves in these places, one of two major possibilities would have happened. One, the powers that be would have realized the liability of doing what they were going to do. And they would have realized that they would not be able to cover up the impending war crimes because there would be white Western blood that would be spilled alongside all of the dark-skinned peoples who really don't matter, quite frankly. They would not be able to cover it up. It would be impossible. And immediately it would have been identified for what it was, a war crime and crimes against humanity, if enough of us were there. I defy anyone to tell me that that would not have been the reality. You would have had, of the 10,000 people there, sending emails, writing letters, contacting their family members and telling them the brutal reality on the ground, never mind taking pictures and being there with their body parts mixed with the body parts of the innocent people of Iraq. That's what would have happened. And at the very least, if that many of us were there, many of us would have died, we would have experienced that horror, and we would have been witnesses to what is and what continues to be a massive crime against humanity. But we didn't do that. We didn't do that. We demonstrated, because demonstration is acceptable, because it's not a great risk. We're not willing to risk our lives for someone over there, even though we don't want them to be killed, because we don't see them as a brother or a sister. If you saw it as your brother or your sister, would you sit back in London and protest? I don't think so. I certainly wouldn't. I would put myself there and I would do everything I could to help my brother or sister, and I'd be willing to die for my brother or sister. I couldn't do anything otherwise because I would not be able to respect myself if I didn't do that. It doesn't matter that it's not my blood brother or sister, it is my brother or sister. And it is parents who are losing their children in the most obscene of ways. This is what happens, and it's always the same. And yet, we still haven't reached that point when we realize our real potential, who we are, how we can affect the world that we live in, and how action, more than words, can really affect the change that we wish to see in the world. It didn't happen, and now, where do we stand with Iraq? I mean, fuck's sake, man. We're talking about our financial difficulties, and we've laid waste to an entire nation. Best estimates, in all honesty, really probably are somewhere between 1 million to 2 million dead. Never mind the maimed, the traumatized, millions of refugees, millions of orphans, a country destroyed. Even now, on a regular basis, bombings, the place is being broken apart by design. It's disempowered so that we can extract resources, and everything didn't go quite to plan, but much of it did go to plan because, in truth, the real necessary component to the maintenance of the tyranny of this world is never-ending division. We must, from the tyrant's point of view, maintain the state of division amongst the people. Right now, what we're seeing is a complete and totally transparent manipulation of what people perceive to be Islam. You have these fanatical fake Muslims in Syria and other parts of the world who feel it's absolutely fine, apparently, to go kill Muslim brothers and sisters because they come from a different sect. And yet the state of Israel, which, I would have thought as an al-Qaeda operative would have been the first target, has not once been attacked by al-Qaeda. These are fake Muslims who do not practice true Islam. I have met many real Muslims. I look back to Brother Malcolm X as a beautiful example of someone who initially didn't actually understand true Islam, but before he was murdered, he most certainly did. And it was when he understood true Islam that he became incredibly dangerous, much more dangerous than even Martin Luther King. And they got rid of him right fast. And I know a man who studied the assassination of Malcolm X, a Swedish professor. He did his doctoral thesis on it, and it's absolutely clear that the FBI did that. And they brag about it in their inner circles that this is one of their greatest successes, if not their greatest achievement, because they managed to pull off this assassination and make it look like it was other Muslims who did this. It was patsies and the FBI that actually assassinated him. I'm convinced of that. But the reason why Malcolm X was such a threat was because he also understood the concept. And very famously, he took his Hajj to Mecca, and he wrote about how he sat at the same table and drank from the same cup and ate from the same plate as Muslims, people who he would have considered to be white previous to this, but who he now found out were in truth his brothers. And if Islam could do that for white brothers and sisters in other parts of the world, then maybe it could help the American population as well. Now again, I'm not a Muslim, but I have spent enough time with Muslims. I've lived in Gaza, I've been to Iran, I just got back from Iran for a second time. I've spent time in the Middle East, I've spent a lot of time with Muslims here in this country, and I know the difference between the manufactured clash of civilizations and lies about Islam and the real Islam, which is a beautiful thing and not a threat to any of us. In fact, the real Muslim is bound to respect and honor all of his fellow human beings because, after all, they're all part of God's creation now, aren't they? In fact, let me tell you a story about Iran because, this is the game that's being played and has been played for some time now, is this whole Iranian threat, deja vu. I didn't even realize this until I just went to Iran, and I thought I knew a little bit more than most, but in Iran, they have a peace museum in Tehran. And I walked into this peace museum, and I thought, first off, wow, how many peace museums do we see in the West? We see all sorts of museums dedicated and memorials dedicated to war. There's every frickin' war we ever had, there's memorials and museums and all sorts of stuff. But we don't see many peace museums, but they have one in Tehran. If you know anything about Iran, you also know that Iran has not invaded a country for centuries. They haven't. Regardless of what we're hearing about them, that country has not invaded anybody else. So whatever crimes are being committed internally, which of course every country has its crimes internally, and certainly Iran is no exception, but regardless of that, they have not exported their crimes to other parts of the world. They have never shown any indication of being a threat to anyone, including Israel, for that matter. They've never threatened to attack Israel or anything like that. But they've spoken the truth. Their leaders have spoken the truth about what is the state of Israel, what does it represent, where did it come from, how does it affect the world that we live in? Is this something that is agreeable with a sane and just society? And for the crime of speaking the truth, this is where we target Iran. The only war that Iran has been involved in the last couple centuries really is the Iran-Iraq War. And if we know anything about that, we have to acknowledge that the reason for that war was because the Iranians had the audacity to expel the puppet in the Shah of Iran. The Shah, who basically defiled Islam on many different levels, was forcing westernization down the throats of the Iranian people, many of whom who don't agree with our so-called Western civilization. And quite frankly, I happen to agree with them. Who are we to talk about civilization? As Gandhi all too rightly said, when he was asked, what do you think about Western civilization? I think it's a good idea, because it doesn't exist, quite frankly, or at least I don't understand what definition of civilization we're living with. But if this is civilized, my God, what is barbaric? As far as I'm concerned, we are as barbaric as it gets. Regardless of the fact that we're not the ones actively going out carrying out these policies, these are representatives of our governments who are going out with our military that we pay for that are committing these crimes. Iran was punished because it had the audacity of shedding our puppet who was torturing people and forcing values down the throats of the people that they didn't want, and basically completely and totally destroying the integrity of a nation. And a man stood up, Imam Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini. I mean, most of you, if you know anything about him, would be impregnated with the idea that he's some sort of Muslim fanatic, probably imagined that he would be antagonistic towards the infidel and endorsing the idea of jihad, misunderstood word, one after another, and so on and so forth. That's absolutely a lie. That's an absolute lie. In fact, if you looked at the truth of what this man stood for, you'd have to say, what a beautiful man. Look at what he stood for. He stood for the right of the people to be free, to determine their own fate and their own existence, to shed off the oppressors and to take control of your lives, to respect women, contrary to what many would think in this room. If you go to Iran and you see how the people live and you see the way the women are treated, I mean really, seriously, whereas here we've got sex trade all over the place. You want a woman, you want an underage girl, you can find that here, no problem. We've got it. And we've got it all over our so-called Western civilization. Women are prostituted left, right, and center. And for me, I look at the beauty of a woman and I think there's nothing more beautiful than a woman, especially a mother. And for me, actually, that is where I get whatever humanity I've got is from my mother. The love that my mother gave to me has now been transmitted through me to the people that I interact with to the best of my ability. But it was that love. And if you take away that love, if you pervert that love, if you turn it into something, if you turn it into some object and you prostitute it, you pervert the society from the very core, from the foundation, and that's what we do, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm not we all should be wearing veils and, no one should be able to show their skin. I mean, that's not what it's about, but what it is about for me is that women are precious, and if you bought into the con that women are being oppressed in Iran and we need to help them out and we need to help bring democracy to them, come on, seriously. Are you buying into that line? There are more women in universities in Iran right now than there are men in Tehran. How does that work? There are women in high positions of power who very much exercise all of the same rights that every human being would want to exercise. Now, I'm not here to say that Iran is perfect. It most certainly is not. It has issues. There is corruption. There are crimes that are being committed, and there are excesses of power, no question about it. But let me give you an example of where this nation stood when it was being attacked by our attack dog in Saddam Hussein. Keep in mind that the Iranian Revolution went from 1978 to 79, culminated in the hostage situation in which hundreds of spies and diplomats mixed together at a spy den in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran were overrun and held captive for over a year, 444 days. Now, in that process, the Ayatollah Khomeini was universally accepted as the leader. Of course, there were some exceptions, but the overwhelming majority of the people of Iran supported this man, and they did not forget the actions of this man in the face of that tyrant known as the Shah. This man faced death, and literally he was a symbol of something much bigger than any one single man could be. And it was this man who rose to the position of supreme leader in what became the Islamic Republic of Iran. Within a year of this revolution, and almost immediately after the hostages were released, the invasion of Iran by the Iraqi army ensued. And let me tell you that it was merciless, absolutely merciless. Keep in mind as well that much of the Iranian military capacity had been diminished because now, whereas they had support both economically, militarily, technologically, all of that disappeared. So any spare parts for any kind of hardware that they might have used in war, all of the kind of training and technical assistance that would have been required immediately disappeared. And so they found themselves in a war in which they were fighting an enemy that was being armed by virtually the whole world. I mean, the Western world in particular, France, Britain, America, European nations, even Russia, the Soviet Union, was supplying Saddam Hussein with weapons, including weapons of mass destruction such as chemical weapons. I didn't realize this until I went to the museum, the Peace Museum in Tehran, but Saddam Hussein didn't just gas the Kurds in Halabja, which I knew about that, and this is one of the most horrendous crimes. It's the first time that sarin gas, which we're hearing so much about now, sarin gas, first time that was used against civilians, first time in history, and it was used in mass. But it wasn't just Halabja. Saddam Hussein attacked small cities, field hospitals with chemical weapons, mustard gas, sarin gas, and he used approximately 2,000 tons of chemical weapons. He was hitting the Iranian people, civilian targets, one after another, continuously, especially for the last 2 years, from 86 to 88. Imagine if this wasn't our ally, our little attack dog, how much do you think you'd know about these chemical weapons being used? Imagine if a fraction of that were used against our allies. Imagine how much you'd know. You'd know every last detail of the crime that is using these weapons. But most of you won't know, and I didn't even know, the magnitude of how much of these weapons were used. A hideous reality that our government supported in every way, in every meaningful way. And we supported that. Now, what is amazing, and I'll bet, if anyone knows this, tell me, please raise your hand if you know this. I did not know this, and this is an amazing truth, an empowering truth, and one that runs directly counter to the false notion that we were being given of the Iranians. It was posited to the Iranian leadership, keep in mind the supreme leader being Ayatollah Khomeini, the latest incarnation of Hitler in his day. And it was posited, we're being attacked with weapons of mass destruction, not just chemical weapons, but our cities are being attacked mercilessly. What should we do? What should our response be? And much thought was put into it, and it was concluded that they could not, as Muslims, attack civilian targets, i.e. cities like Basra. They could not attack them, like we have attacked cities countless times. They could not do that because it's haram. Because God, how could he support that? How could any sane God, any kind of God that would be worth respecting, support attacking a civilian population, including women and children, en masse, knowingly killing and murdering people, dismembering people, traumatizing people? How could any just God do that? Well, that is the conclusion of the leadership of Iran, and therefore they did not hit back Iranian cities, even after being hit mercilessly with chemical weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. I want you to think about that. And did anybody know that in this audience, that Iran was hit that way, and they made an active decision from the Ayatollah Khomeini himself? Did anybody know that? See, I didn't know that either. And I find that remarkable. I find that truly remarkable. So here you have a country that has not attacked anyone for centuries. Here you have a country that has lived peaceably for all this time, except for when it had to defend itself. Here you have a country that lost 1 million of its sons, probably about 1 million of its sons during this brutal, sadistic war. And it has still maintained this position of only defensive, effectively only a defensive posture. And here you have a country that is surrounded on all sides, on every side, from the sea, Afghanistan, Iraq, up north, the whole place is surrounded, being constantly threatened. Here you have a country which is now enduring many years of sanctions. Actually, ever since the overthrow of our puppet, they have been enduring sanctions, but those sanctions have tightened more and more as of late. And all this is because, what are we told? That Iran is in pursuit of nuclear weapons, and God help us all, because when they have nuclear weapons, unlike us civilized Western folk, they might actually use them. Of course, completely ignoring the fact that the only country that's ever used nuclear weapons has done so twice. And not only, have we done this twice, we've used depleted uranium countless times. I mean, is it possible? What kind of reality are we living in that these people can even get away with proposing such nonsense? How is it possible that we allow this type of bullshit to be put in front of us? How is it possible? Well, it's only possible because we still haven't reached a point where we realize the truth. And the truth is that these are our brothers and sisters. And guess what? They have no ill will towards us. I tell you what, I've lived in Gaza, a place that has been enduring horrendous injustice. And the biggest victims, of course, as always, children. A place, 1.6 million people in Gaza, over half of them are children. Over half of them. And what is the condition of these children? Well, I'll tell you what, daily trauma. Daily. They're malnourished, anemic, and they're being terrorized on a daily basis. This is the reality of life. Why haven't we done more to stop this? Well, because we don't yet quite see them as our brothers and sisters. If it was our little nephew or our little niece, our little brother or our little sister, how much more would we do? Well, I can assure you that if you see them as your brother and sister, you have to do more. Otherwise, you're not going to respect yourself. The fact is that we're being manipulated one time after another. It's one ridiculous manipulation after another, and it doesn't take a genius to see through these lies. It really doesn't, and I'm very happy to see that more and more people are realizing the truth. I'm especially happy to see that people are realizing the tactic of false flag operations. This is critical, that we understand this. I'm happy to see that the Boston false flag, which I'll guarantee it is being immediately exposed for what it is. And ultimately, I'm happy to see that more and more people are realizing that it doesn't have to be this way. But the truth of the matter is that it's not going to change for the better. We will not affect a better world unless we do what we're capable of doing. I think there's many ways, and everybody has their own path. And again, I don't suggest that I'm somehow in any way better, because I'm not. I have only come to a conclusion which compels me to do that which I am capable of doing. If you have the attitude that you see others as your brother and sister, you understand that they literally are your brothers and sisters, and you manage to shed the next major tool of the manipulation, which is fear. Fear generally induced by material pursuits and also the physical existence. And again, the previous speaker was getting on this subject, and I love the subject because I don't actually believe in what people call death. What do you mean by that? And I know there probably are some atheists in the audience, and they may reject this completely, and that's fair enough, no problem. But I know, to my own satisfaction, keeping in mind that I'm not religious. I'm not a Muslim, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Jew, I'm not a Hindu, I'm not a Buddhist, I'm not whatever. No, I am a brother. That's all I am. I see the truth, which is that we're all connected. And I also understand that responsibility is both an individual and a collective responsibility. And we have failed in our responsibility to affect a better world, and therefore the world that we have is the world that we've created for ourselves. If we truly want to change the world, then we're going to have to do a little bit more than what we've done. And I'm happy to see that I see more and more people willing to accept that responsibility and doing more about it. I've been informed I had 5 minutes, so why don't we leave it there, and I'll come back in a bit. So that wasn't like a whole downer thing, was it? Was it perceived as a downer, like you're all lazy and we're not doing enough and blah, blah, blah? I didn't mean it like that, and I'll try not to end it that way, because actually I also believe that the cynic is the tyrant's best friend. Without the cynic, this madness could not continue. In order for a better world to be created, you have to first imagine it, that it's true, that it's possible. And this is something that I've seen with the so-called Arab Spring, the Islamic awakening in the Arab countries, where clearly the goals have not been achieved. However, I totally disagree with those who say that it's all manipulation, CIA, and so on and so forth, because If that be the case, it would have been a huge blunder, if you ask me, because what has happened is a seed has been planted in the mind of the people who had been under the tyranny of people like Mubarak for decades. Mr. Reliable, man, anything that would have been wanted from this puppet would have been achieved, and really anybody who stood up to him, well, faced the consequences, was either killed or imprisoned, and it was all quite reliable. So why would you trade that in for a revolution, fake or not, and plant the seed, the idea in the mind of the people that they could have something better, that they could have a government that they could be proud of, that they could be proud of Egypt once again. The idea itself is the most dangerous thing of all. If the idea is not there, then people won't pursue it. But if you believe that it's possible and you're willing to fight for it, then it indeed becomes a very possible reality. And this, for me, is the world that I see. Despite the fact that there is so much madness in this world, there is incredible beauty on so many different levels, especially when you go to a place like Gaza and live there as I have. When you meet people who have been through so much and who are overwhelmingly patient and dignified, respectful. I walked the streets of Gaza for 6 months, oftentimes in the middle of the night, completely on my own, and overwhelmingly I was treated with great respect. Unfortunately, while I was there as well, a dear friend of mine named Vittorio Aragoni was murdered. And he was murdered by fake Muslim Salafists, who, as far as I'm concerned, were agents of Israel, whether they knew it or not. And no Muslim of any kind of true character would have ever done such a thing, but unfortunately, he was murdered. Which sort of leads me to the next, example of what my experience is. I decided some time ago that I wasn't going to do what was right for me. I was simply going to do what was right. And oftentimes, if you think about that, and you put yourself in various positions, you'll find that your experiences, the richness of your experiences are going to grow very, very fast, very, very fast. It's understandable that we will do what's right for us, but oftentimes, unfortunately, there is a difference between what is right for us, or us personally, and what is simply right. And in doing things that I consider to be right, obviously making mistakes, here and there, I have been blessed in ways that I can't even tell you. I mean, if I were to die tomorrow, even though I don't believe in death, but let's say, whatever, this mortal existence ends tomorrow, I would not wish anyone to cry an extra tear for me. Man, I've lived a life that's been so full and so blessed. The real tragedy of life is not living it to the fullest, if you ask me. What a great blessing this is that we have. What a wonderful blessing, the ultimate blessing, life, the ability to express our humanity, to be human beings, and to enjoy all of the fruits of this beautiful world that we've been presented with. And to have that and not actually exercise this precious thing is a tremendous tragedy, and all too many of us do that, oftentimes out of fear. Now, Iran, let me just say, I was asked, do you think that they're going to attack Iran? I think it's very clear that they wanted to attack Iran, and it was in the crosshairs and should have been attacked years ago. Why hasn't it been attacked is an interesting question, and I believe the reasons are very profound and very inspiring and very hopeful. The reason why, if you ask me, is that these powers that be, they make a lot of mistakes, but they're not stupid, usually. I think Building 7 was kind of stupid, but aside from things like this, generally, they know human psychology to the T, really, upside down and backwards. They know if they create an event, they're going to get a massive response in a certain way. They know how to manipulate us, and they've been doing it successfully for eons. So they have the ability to do whatever they want, and yet they haven't attacked Iran. I believe the reason why they haven't is because they know deep down that there are many key elements within society, especially some in high positions of power, who they fear will not follow the order once it is given. Sort of a Mubarak moment where Mubarak realized that the demonstrations were too large. He couldn't quell them with any of the lesser means of quelling, that he would have to go in with full force and kill a large number of people and push them out. And he ordered the military to do just that, and they did not follow the order. And where is Mubarak now? I think that doesn't go unnoticed at all amongst many who are in positions of power, including in the military. And I see a lot of actual hope within the military, some of the places that many of us would think, are you kidding me? Are you mad? No, I actually believe that there are many very decent people, as misled as they've been, as ignorant as they may have been, as conveniently ignorant as they've been, that actually do care about their nation and even the world. And there are red-blooded American patriots at high levels of power in the Pentagon and even in the intelligence services who realize that what we are doing is flirting with the end of the world as we know it, which I sort of liken to a Kennedy moment. If you know anything about Kennedy, who was the last president that actually had any balls and did anything, quite frankly, if you know about him, he actually was a servant to the rich. There's really not all that any noble history of the guy previous to the last months of his life. In fact, he did exactly what he was told. He obviously had a fondness for women. He had his own flaws, and basically he was as reliable as anybody else. But I think the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which he had to realize that he was being, whether he accepted, I think there's two types of people who get to president. Some of them are so delusional that they actually fool themselves into thinking that they actually have some semblance of authority. They have no authority at all. I think most of them are wise enough to know. You have your advisors. If you don't do what they tell you to do, well, good luck to you. So they do what they're told, and they do it almost without exception. But he did what he was told, and it took us to the brink of a third world war and possible nuclear annihilation. And I think that was the Kennedy moment where he realized, my God, I could facilitate the end of the world, and guess what? My kids live in this world as well. I mean, how am I going to benefit? How are my children going to benefit once there's a third world war? And in that state of mind, he did some things which were his death sentence, quite frankly. He was getting ready to disband the CIA, and he started to issue money. And for me, this is the single most important thing that we can exploit if we really want to change this world for the better. Iceland has given us a perfect example of what to do. And it's amazing how well they have kept that story down and kept people ignorant of what's happened in Iceland, because it is, from my mind, from my perspective, that is the key. That's the major weakness. It's the Achilles heel of these son of a bitches in power. Without the private control of the issuance of money, everything that they control, every single thing, every aspect of society, everything that is meaningful, whether it's the prostitutes in the media, the prostitutes in the governments, whether it's the corporations, whether it's the infiltrators who get paid, or any of these number of ways that they exploit our weaknesses and corrupt society from the bottom up and ultimately control us through division. Everything that they require to do this is held within the money system. Take that money system away from them, and their ability to outspend us 1 billion to 1 has been destroyed. Take the ability to print money away from them and print it ourselves, interest-free, to be able to use that for creating jobs, building infrastructure, having high-quality education, transparency. We do that. Every single thing that has been corrupted by a world in which anything and anyone who can be bought by material things no longer gets that financial reward, and we will solve our problems much more quickly than I think people can imagine, just with this one single thing. And guess what? It's coming. There ain't no doubt in my mind at all. There is nothing that can be done to stop what is the obvious progression of this system and this reality, and that is inflation. Who has not noticed inflation? I mean, is there anyone in this room who hasn't noticed inflation? I mean, if you know anything about fiat currencies and the history of currencies, in a certain point where the debt continues to climb and more money is pumped into the system, what you get is inflation, and eventually, without exception, you are going to get into hyperinflation. At that point, and it could be combined with some other tactics that can be used by the powers that be as well, but once we hit hyperinflation, all of the prosperity that we have enjoyed in the so-called Western civilization is going to go completely out the window. And it is very likely that we will have complete and utter chaos if we get to that point. We could avoid that, quite frankly, if we did what Kennedy did, or if we insisted on it. How is it possible? I mean, if anything mocks us as people, it's so remarkable. This is what we're being told. Okay, everyone, just say I'm the prime minister, or, some prostitute in the media, whatever, some expert economics, professor or something like that. They're saying to us, okay, everyone, I'm sorry, but you know what? We've lived too high on the hog. We've spent beyond our capacity. We absolutely, is it going? Hello? We have not done everything that we need to do. We haven't worked hard enough. We're in debt, and we need to go through this painful process of austerity. We're going to have to cut your social services. We're going to have to increase taxes. We're going to have increased tuition fees. If you're retired, I'm sorry, but you may not have enough money to have a roof over your head, put food on the table, and that's all because we've spent too much money and we're in debt. And there's just one question to ask in response to that. Who the hell do we owe this money to? This is the reality. We're being told that we have to pay back our debt, that we are all in debt to who? When the people figure this out, I mean, this has got to be one of the greatest scam of all time. And the fact that we allow these individuals at the top of these pyramids, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, and the Federal Reserve in particular, but also the IMF and the World Bank, the fact that we let them get away with this tells me that we deserve everything we get, because this is ridiculous. Completely and totally ridiculous. Every single evil that you can imagine, every war that's ever been fought, every crime that's been committed in one form or shape is directly related to the private control of money. Take control of that, we take control of our destiny. We can live prosperously, all of us, not just the so-called first world, the Western civilization, but the whole frickin' world can live a decent and dignified life if we only take control of the issuance of money. That one simple, single thing. It's just sitting there staring us in the face, and Iceland gave us a perfect example of what to do. And this is where I definitely pull the gloves off. To the fucking bankers, go fuck yourself. We don't owe you anything. Anything. And furthermore, if you find yourself hanging from a lamppost, consider yourself lucky, because if you have to endure what you have doled out to countless people, God help you. Good luck to you. Because the amount of suffering and death that has come directly from this system of tyranny cannot be measured. It simply cannot be measured. It is gargantuan. It is incredible. And I'm not a person who seeks vengeance. I'm really not. I'm personally willing to forgive as much as one can forgive these crimes. But there are a lot of people, and I've met many of them, who have endured such horrendous injustice and criminality, the death and destruction of family members, body parts blown all over the place, children being traumatized. I don't expect them to forgive. I hope they can, but it's not my place to say that they must forgive for these kinds of crimes, which continue to be committed every single day, and again comes right back to the root. Go fuck yourself. We don't owe you anything. In fact, you should be sitting in a jail at the very least for the rest of your life, and in fact, they've done that in Iceland as well. They didn't just tell them to go piss off. They actually put many of the bankers in jail. This is an essential step. Essential. Now, it's not in itself the panacea to solve all problems, but without question, every single problem we have in this world comes directly from this system. And if we deal with the root, we will solve the other problems relatively quickly. We don't have to have the chaos which is being engineered for us. Which brings me back to Iran. Iran has been in the crosshairs, and Iran has been the target. And we continue to hear these people talking about Iran the threat. How many people here are aware of the fact that Iran, the supreme leader of Iran, has issued a fatwa, a decree that says that weapons of mass destruction, specifically nuclear weapons, are haram, that it is against our religious principles, and that we do not and will not seek the production of nuclear weapons because, effectively, it is an insult to God? As raise your hand if you're aware of that, please. Okay, so there, good. This is important information. We need to understand this. Now, I know that most people's reaction, well, yeah, he's just lying. Listen, because our leaders are so corrupt that every last one of them lies to their teeth every opportunity they get, doesn't mean that everyone in this world is a pathological liar. And really, in all truth, it's absolutely consistent. I gave you an example earlier of where Iran was hit mercilessly for 8 years in the Iran-Iraq war and did not respond in kind. Not only that, but for centuries they've not attacked anyone. So why is it that we would suspect that they're lying about this issue? Even though it makes perfect sense that they would pursue the production of nuclear weapons. Quite frankly, in a certain way, I wish they had a nuclear weapon, because it would not be possible for us to attack if they had it. Because we are bullies, the classic bullies. We don't attack people who can fight back. We only slaughter people who have no capacity to fight us back. We're the classic cowards and bullies. And that's all we do. We don't pick on people who can fight back. It's disgusting, and it reminds me of the days when I was a little kid, looking at the schoolyard situation where the bully was picking on little kids, and I always thought that was disgusting. Sometimes I didn't have the courage to do what I knew I needed to do, and I think that stuck with me for the rest of my life. And I will not do that now. These people cannot be allowed to get away with this madness and treat others in a way which is exemplified by might makes right. Might does not make right. Might makes misery and death and suffering, and this is what has been allowed because of our fear our ignorance, our apathy, our acquiescence, our complicity, or our outright criminality. And we need to understand that the only way that we can affect the change that is required for a better world is to take responsibility. I'm a big-time believer in responsibility. If others are responsible, if the Israelis are responsible for the crimes that they're committing and it's only them, what are the chances that this is going to stop? Are they going to stop out of the goodness of their hearts? If they're the ones who are responsible, are we not responsible that our European governments are doing trade every single day with this monster of an entity which treats people as subhumans on a daily basis and traumatizes and terrorizes innocent children every single day for the crime of simply being Palestinian? That's the crime they commit, being a Palestinian. And if we look at this system and we look at the fact that we have our governments continuing to do this sort of stuff, then we have to realize that if we're not responsible, then there is no hope. No hope at all. If there is an attack on Iran, well, this is the seemingly inevitable collective suicide madness that I believe the powers that be want. I absolutely believe that the powers that be, they've done their focus groups, they know that they've lost key allies. As a perfect example of this, which is really important that we understand this and acknowledge it, the fact that the CIA and Mossad and other intelligence agencies and the Pentagon have all, at the top levels, advised that an attack on Iran is not only unwise, but unwarranted. Think about that. These are the lockstep robots that are meant to authorize any kind of action that is wanted by the powers that be who are dissenting. It's not you or me or some hippie on the street protesting. This is the heads of these intelligence services who are not in line with the program. What does that tell you? It tells you that a lot more people are realizing, including those who have historically done whatever is asked of them, they are questioning their position and questioning their ability to facilitate what could be the end of the world as we know it. This, to me, is a beautiful thing and very, very inspiring and very, very uplifting. It's not the be-all, end-all, and it doesn't guarantee that we're going to avoid the end of the world as we know it. We've come close. If you go online, you can look. There's at least 20 instances where we've come this close to a third world war, to a nuclear war. What's happening in Syria right now is not a game. If these son of a bitches are allowed to create the illusion that we must remove the regime in order to help the people and attack, Russia said just the other day in the aftermath of the Israeli attack, how many of you know this? I mean, this is important information. Putin has said, we will not sit by if you do this again. They've already sent surface-to-air missiles, high-tech surface-to-air missiles to Syria. They've already provided the training, and ultimately, if Israel does this again, there's a very good chance that it will involve Russia. It's already involved them on a material level, giving that kind of support. This is not a game. And if you ask me, if you want to understand the world, the first thing you need to do, the first mistake that we make is if we have any sanity at all, is that we're looking at it through the filter of sanity or some level of humanity. You need to get out of that perspective. You need to look at the world from the perspective of a psychopath. You need to look at it from the perspective of a psychopath who has enormous power and who is drunk on that power and is absolutely committed to maintaining that power at all costs. No options off the table, as it were. This is the perspective that you need to understand. If you look at the world from that perspective, then virtually everything that is happening can be understood quite easily. But if you look at it from the perspective of sanity, it just doesn't make any sense. Why are we doing this? I mean, this is just pure madness, the whole thing, to the point that we're threatening our own existence. As a parent, if we want to go ahead and sit by idly while this is being played out in front of us, well, that's one thing. But if we have children, what kind of parents are we? And how can we respect ourselves if we give a world to our children which isn't even livable? This is what we're flirting with. I have believed for some time that these two opposing forces are coming to a head. And I think there was never any way to avoid this. There are many things we could do to avoid the worst of the worst scenarios, but it was always going to come to a head. The powers that be were never going to relinquish that power willingly. It's not going to be their choice. A lot of people say Israel will never give up. What are you talking about? Do you think it's going to be up to them? Was it up to the South African apartheid regime to give up its power? No, it was not. They didn't do it out of the goodness of their hearts. It wasn't up to them. It was over. And we're reaching that point with Israel. I have no doubt whatsoever that Israel will not exist. It will not be a Jewish supremacist state much longer. Absolutely not. It's not possible. It's just not possible. And I'm actually thinking that the settlements are a blessing in disguise because they've made the so-called two-state solution, which if you ask me is the two-state disaster. It's the great Nakba. It's worse than 1948 because if you take this little tiny state, it's a fraction of original Palestine, this economically inferior, militarily insignificant state, created next to this monster of Jewish supremacy and Talmudism. It's only one rocket attack, which easily could be a false flag attack away from being pummeled by its neighbor again and again and again. And if the Palestinians ever agree to a two-state solution, as their puppets are trying to do in many respects now with land swaps and things like this, if they agree to that, that's it. You agreed to it. I can understand why you did it. You were clearly under duress. You thought it was the best you could get, but please never accept that two-state deal. It is the greatest reward for tyranny and injustice that can be imagined. It is a reward for ethnic cleansing and genocide, quite frankly. There is no way that it can be justified that a Jewish supremacist state that treats the Palestinians as subhuman should be allowed to exist if they cannot abandon this ideology of supremacism. If they cannot look at the Palestinians as brothers and sisters, then they should be abolished, quite frankly. And they're imploding themselves anyway. So it's not even up to me. It's not even necessary for me to do anything. It's just the way it's playing out. It's not sustainable. We cannot continue this way. And when I talk about supremacism, I have to talk about American supremacism. Because it's American supremacism which has been the most evil, dastardly, destructive force in the last century, and it is, without question, all tied to supremacism. I am against all forms of supremacism, every form. The basis of my vegetarianism is that I'm against the idea of our species having the right to do whatever it is that we choose to do to non-humans. Might does not make right. It does not make right. Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. And when we look at the consequences of deciding to treat non-humans as the way we do, we're destroying our environment for this. We're absolutely destroying any kind of moral or ethical code we have. It's completely and totally unjustifiable what we're doing. And we are absolutely 100% not going to be able to sustain this because the higher on the food chain we eat, the more resources we need to consume, and there ain't no way around that. It's a natural law. It's the reality. I'm against all forms of supremacism, but I'm especially focused on those forms of supremacism which present the greatest threat. And the greatest threats are American supremacism and Jewish supremacism, and the British Empire. The British Empire sitting there behind the scenes playing the civilized role and the justification, blah, blah, blah. Sitting there, London, the power central, all of this combined, the true axis of evil. It's all supremacism at its core. And deep down, actually, I don't even believe the Jewish people have any real power. Those that are running the world, they use Judaism as a cover for who they really are. But the Jewish people are being led to slaughter like sheep, whether they know it or not. I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't care how many mistakes they've made, how indoctrinated they've been. I don't want to see my fellow human beings, despite the fact that they've been involved in massive crimes, I don't want to see them killed in vengeance. I don't. I want to see them understand the truth. And the truth is that they have been conned, and that con has resulted in behavior which is completely and totally unacceptable. And it must end now. And if you cannot find it in your heart and in your mind to see others as you see yourself and treat them with a level of respect and dignity, then you are a threat to everyone. And bottom line, I know my birth nation is the number one culprit in this regard. And again, it all comes down to supremacism. We think we are better than others. This is unacceptable. And it's at the core of our problems in this world. If we manage to see through the cons, if we manage to shed the fear, I'm a firm believer that this world is going to change. And let me tell you the world that I imagine. You know, we were talking about free energy. This is not an illusion. This is a reality. It's sitting there waiting for us. We have it within our means to get off this manufactured oil addiction and have energy, which is going to liberate all of the people everywhere. It's there. It's just right there. I can taste it. It's waiting for us. If we are sane, if we become sane, it's not about adopting my ideology. No, Muslims, Christians, even Jews, if they can abandon the supremacist ideology of chosenness, which gives them sanction to do whatever the hell they want, if you can manage to hold on to your faith and let go of the supremacist ideology that really is quite inherent in it, if you can get rid of that somehow, excellent. We can be Jews, we can be Muslims, we can be Christians, we can be atheists, we can be socialists, we can be even capitalists to a certain degree. But ultimately, we will all, if we develop a sanity, we're going to come to the understanding finally of who we really are, which is all members of one human family. What's good for you is good for me. There is no way around this. I do not benefit from taking advantage of my fellow. I do not. It's an illusion. And it's an illusion that's powerful, but it's an illusion once broken is going to liberate us. And I genuinely believe that the world that will be created, if we do what we're capable of doing, and I'm not talking about generations, I'm seriously, I mean really, this is going to happen within the next few years or maybe 10 years. 10 years is so far down the road at this pace, with the consciousness of humanity rising as it is, and make no mistake it is, understand that the masses are not the key. Don't be preoccupied with the masses. It's that growing minority of conscientious people who are coming into consciousness, those are the ones that matter. The masses are followers. They will follow. Right now they're following all sorts of rubbish. Understandable, but that's what they're doing. They will, if those of us of conscience do what we're capable of doing, they will follow those leaders who are exemplifying what it is to be a human being. And in this world, where we have sanity and you can maintain your ideologies, we will, not only will we have prosperity, but we will celebrate. We will celebrate the differences between us. This is beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Why would we want a carbon copy of ourselves or our own culture? If you travel, you can't help but be awestruck by the beauty of the diversity, especially when it's combined with sanity. It is a beautiful thing. In that diversity we have strength. There's so much beauty there. All we need to do is become who we really are. And that's human beings. And the most beautiful gift that we have is our humanity. Take that back, everything is possible. It'll bring me to tears if the vote is made and you choose to stay with this criminal entity known as the UK. It is a great opportunity, and you know, we do have, despite the fact that we're so heavily controlled on so many levels, there is still some semblance of freedom, and this decision is, it's inspiring. For me, it's without question, it's one of those essential steps on the path to a better world. How can Scotland, in good conscience, remain a participant, regardless of whatever perceived economic gains could be maintained? How could you, in good conscience, maintain a connection to this criminal entity, this empire that has just run roughshod over the world? I hope to hell you do the right thing. Well, again, I think, you know, Iceland provides an excellent model for what can be done. I mean, they're in isolation, so, you know, they're still vulnerable. It's not to say that they can't be punished and still have real challenges ahead of them, but, I mean, there are a lot of far more qualified people to talk about, you know, the specifics of the model, but certain things are absolute, and that is, one, the abolishment of private control of the issuance of money. I mean, that just goes without saying. I would again support charging these criminals with fraud, massive crimes against humanity for what they've done, because it cannot be denied that the results of this system have caused irreparable harm and suffering to everyone on this planet to one degree or another. And ultimately, if we print our own money, really the value of the money is in the people. You know, come on, we all know the vast majority of people, of course you have people that want to, you know, live off the dole and so on and so forth, and many use the dole so that they can do what they really want to do, so there's no shame in that, of course. But most people want to live a dignified life, and that requires that they do some work, something of value, so that they contribute in some meaningful way. And the value of the money of Scotland and you know, every other country that would choose to do this, I think would be very solid, because most people really do want to be constructive members of society. And also the incentive would be great, because if we print our own money, we will not have this scarcity that is, you know, results in us like little rats running under the table trying to pick up as many crumbs as we can pick up. You know, that's the reality of the world we live in now. Financially, I'm extremely poor by Western standards, but in terms of the real value of life and the richness of life, I'm as rich as they get, you know. I've got incredible richness, and I've realized the obvious, but in material world, I think the basics are there, they're laid out. I'd leave the specifics to more people. I mean, I've started to look at, you know, the mathematically perfected economy, you know, I've looked at other people's propositions, and, you know, if I invested more time, maybe I'll speak more detail about it, but one thing I know for sure is the simple blueprint is there. It's there. And it will certainly, although it could lead to some immediate chaos and some real problems, and invariably it will, the end result of taking this path is obviously far, far better than what we've been dealing with. Funny enough, I spent about a month in Libya, about 2 or 3 months before it started kicking off there, on a convoy to Gaza. And I met a lot of people, and this was in the eastern part of Libya. And the vast majority of people there were not fans of Gaddafi at all. It was sort of like the wild, wild west out there. And clearly, you know, it's understood. If you crossed him, you would have a significant problem. Torture and mass killings did occur. So there's no way that we can portray him as simply good or bad. There was good in him in terms of what he did, and this can't be denied. When he took power, the illiteracy rate was, you know, amongst the highest in the world. It was the poorest country in Africa. People were in a desperate state of impoverishment. And he brought universal education to people, health care. He brought the water from across the desert into Libya, set up programs for independence in terms of farming. See, we can't dispute these things. I mean, this was physical, tangible good. I mean, it's a lot better, even with all the human rights violations, that people have access to education, that they're not living in dire poverty. And, you know, again, these things can't be denied. Also, he was setting up the gold dinar, very much doing what I'm talking about, you know, getting off the central bank system and affecting something that would have benefited the African continent enormously. So, you know, let's be fair here. What I really resent is the idea that we in the West have any position of moral authority to sit there and point the finger at someone else when in fact we are the biggest purveyors of human rights violations, hands down. We don't just have human rights violations in our own countries, we export it all around the world. We pay the most corrupt of the corrupt, the most vile and disgusting to collude with us in maintaining a system of tyranny which results in more suffering than can be measured. And who are we to sit there and point the finger at some, you know, some tin pot dictator or someone else? I'm not trying to absolve them of their crimes, and with regard to Syria and Bashar al-Assad, I don't know a nation where if you cross the government in any meaningful way, you're not going to have a problem. If you know one, I mean, obviously it's a little bit less in Sweden or something, but, you know, pretty much all the countries of the world, if you cross the government, certainly in America, I fled that country. I sought political asylum. I know I was a target, and if you ask black people about their experience in America, how about anal rape in jails, the largest prison population in the world and growing? I mean, come on. How can we, in any logical sense, point the finger over there? I'm not absolving him of his crimes, but it's absolutely true that under Assad, that area was as stable as it gets. It's a secular government that had many different factions who were not fighting each other tooth and nail. This is a manufactured, as he says, every dictator, every leader always says it's outside influences. Well, there's a hell of a lot of truth to that in this case, undeniably so. Undeniably so. Does that mean that I'm absolving him or his regime of the crimes that they've committed? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But it's beyond farcical that we could sit here, first off, and be in a position of moral authority when we have no morality at all. Certainly our leaders have none. Absolutely none. They've never cared about the Iraqi people, the Afghani people, the Pakistani people, the Libyan people. We don't care about anyone. We only see them as commodities, and if they have value, it's in the terms of the commodity that they have. That's it, period, plain and simple. So for us to even have the ability to point the finger, in my mind, is the real issue. How in the hell can we even point the finger at someone else when our houses are a dirty, filthy mess of corruption? So, you know, again, it's not about either you support Assad or you support the people. That's a false paradigm, just like Labor, Conservative, Democrat, Republican. It's a false paradigm set up to try and manipulate us, and I'm not buying into that manipulation. Okay, well, as far as how I get by, I've lived hand to foot for quite a long time. I married a beautiful woman who, like me, has no material aspirations. We only seek to put good food on the table for our children and ourselves, and we have a roof over our head by the blessings that her father gave to her, so we don't have rent and mortgage payments. But I firmly believe that if you make a decision and commit to something, it comes. You manifest the idea and commit to it, things come. I've had so many experiences where things just fell into place. I got just what I needed right when I needed it. And even, beyond that, on the Mavi Marmara, there were things that happened on that ship where if I had been 5 steps later or 5 steps ahead, I could have easily been killed. It's just the way it happened. If you put positive energy into things and you commit to it, you'd be amazed at how things just open up, doors open up, opportunities present themselves, unions and friendships are created, and there's no guarantee, that's just it. You've got to have faith and you've got to make a commitment, and it's worked out extremely well for me. At the same time, there's consequences, of course. As far as reaching people, again, I think the answer to that question lies in the creative capacity of all of us to really make the commitment to do whatever it is that we feel is right for us. Some of these things will be actions in which it's mass movements, and will require massive numbers of people, but there is also the opportunity for individual or small group acts of consciousness that really play a significant role in the raising of the overall consciousness. I think people underestimate the value of even speaking to other people. Really, if we really think about it, the propaganda machine is set up and so enormous, it's pumping all of this misinformation into people. The only thing that really is compensating for that is not just the independent media and websites and things like that, it's loved ones who are speaking to their family members and planting seeds in their heads about the reality of what's really going on. And I'm a firm believer that you can't force it down someone's throat. It becomes counterproductive. I've done that. It doesn't work. But if you see the opportunities, are intuitive enough and intelligent enough, you see these opportunities, you plant the seed. Maybe you go a little bit further on a subject one time or another. But the spread of information and understanding and the shedding of ignorance, I think that's the single most important element. It's not independent media or people like me getting up and speaking like that. It's people, one-to-one, in small groups, talking to their loved ones, sharing this information, but being intelligent enough to not push it down the throat and be counterproductive. This is the key, and it's happening. It's happening. So if you ask me, how do we motivate? It's happening. It's coming. It's coming. I have no doubt about it whatsoever. It's coming. These things are coming to a head, and the masses, regardless of how lost they may be right now, I have faith. They're going to come. I was one of them. If I can change the way I've changed, then I have no reason to believe that other people can't see a better way. And I know the richness of the blessings that I've experienced from walking this path, and I know for a fact that other people will be rewarded in this life or the afterlife or whenever if they simply do what their heart tells them to do. That has been the guide, and it's just that simple. If you really develop that love within your heart, and you let your heart, not your head, it's good to combine the two, be a little bit intelligent, but overwhelmingly follow your heart, the rewards, they come, and it's coming. Really. I don't rest on the laurels, though. I'm not saying that we're definitely going to survive and it's all going to be great. Definitely not. We could destroy ourselves. But these things are coming to a head, and the masses, whether they know it or not, are going to be engaging sooner than I think most people even think.
Ladies and gentlemen, the example that is Ken O'Keefe. Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you.